talked a lot about language and how language structure is one approach of looking at language. And it's kind of a typical developmental approach. We kind of look at how to describe the language. But really, what we need to know in terms of helping kids learn is how is it that they acquire the language. And so today we want to add some more layers to that information. And last time, speaking of layers, we talked about how different concepts have different layers of meaning. Mm-hmm. And so we ask you to think about apple as a concept that has different layers. And it's one of those that in the here and now, it's a tangible fruit, mm-hmm. something that's in your lunch, that mom's put in there and cut into slices, and you have apple slices. But you might not even make the connection between the apple slices and what an actual apple looks like because it's already been cut, okay? And so it looks different. But then mom wants to know if you want apple, okay, in your lunch, and you watch her cut it. So then if she's using good, rich language, she says, I'm going to cut some of the apples up, and I'll put some of the slices in your lunch. How many slices do you want? And the 3-year-old looks at it and goes, well, I want to help cut the apples. And you say, okay. So now the child, by using that language, I want to cut the apples, the child's actually refining their thinking. And every time they do that, then they're also refining the brain function in terms of how the brain works.
This is an apple. An apple can be cut. There's part of the apple we don't eat. Why don't we eat that part?
Right.
What's the seed for? What are we going to do with that seed? Why don't we eat the seed? Right? All these things are cupping. Do I want the whole apple or half the apple?
Are 3 slices or 4? And how big are the slices? Are they little ones or big ones, Mm-hmm. And that's all the rich language, okay? Otherwise, it's like, okay, I'll go fix your lunch, you go play. Mm-hmm. And when you do that, then you're actually not giving the child opportunity to refine, all right? Mm-hmm. So that's what young language sounds like for apple. But then it changes again, doesn't it? So, about 5... that little 4 to 5-year-old is going to be looking at you when you say you need your Apple iPad because they want to know why that's called an apple. And I have a 3-year-old granddaughter, and that's the kind of question she asks. She wants to know, why do you call that an apple, or why is there an apple? And then I have to explain that. I don't have to. Let me say that differently. I want to explain that because it gives the because language, and we've talked a little bit about that. That's how we do the refinement. Without us giving that information, she doesn't know why I'm going to call it an Apple iPad, or
why there's an apple on the iPad. There's literally a picture.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Or, I might say I'm going to use my iPhone, which is an Apple, but then I'm going to go use my PC and it's not Apple. And so, and then, maybe the parents might say something about having their Apple, and what they're referring to is not a snack. They're referring to, where's my laptop? Because I run my business totally on the laptop.
We do call them Apple Watches too. It's kind of confusing.
And Granty has an Apple Watch, and I remember my granddaughter looking at her and her eyes getting kind of big, like, I don't see the apple kind of thing. She didn't say anything, but you could tell that the little brain was just working away going, is there a picture of that apple? Anyway, but that's how we do apple, and then, if you want to get into the symbolic part, we talk about the Adam's apple. An Adam's apple is a protrusion that women have. It's usually smaller because the larynx is smaller, but men, you can often see it right here where the larynx is. And it's just an area of cartilage that actually protrudes to protect in part the larynx as well as the trachea where the larynx sits. So, it kind of helps us stay healthy that way.
And then we can get it with the idioms and say something like, well, she's the apple of my eye.
Absolutely.
Right?
Which means that she doesn't have an apple costume on.
There's not an apple in her eye.
No, exactly. And again, in English, we have a lot of these idioms, but they come because of the complexity of the refinement of the ideas. So kind of want to continue taking that, and it's hard to imagine you've got 30 kids in a classroom. Some teachers have 36 kids. Some teachers in the upper grades have 45 to 75 kids in a classroom. And some of us as faculty at universities, we have hundreds of kids in the classroom. All right. So how is it that, what do layers look like? What does this refinement look like in the classroom? And I know, Bonnie, your dissertation was about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm just going to grab my little whiteboard here. And those of you who are just listening, you might need to go on our YouTube channel and check it out. But Ellyn will I'll explain and she'll explain. But we all we all learn something based on something that we already know and are familiar with. It has to happen. Doesn't matter if you're learning, what a cat is or if you're learning how to fly a space shuttle, right? You've got to start with what you know. And one of the best ways to do that is to start with a story about yourself, right? And a story has a who, what, when, where, why. It has context, has a person in the picture. And so in the classroom, one of the first big, I guess you could say, learning events that we undertook was to learn more about the topic of ants. And not my aunt. My dad said they were aunts, the female women, right? But actual the little insects called ants. And there's so much to learn about them. Once I started learning, from all the different species to the different actual physical different types within the species to what they do for environment, why they are pests, but why are they also helpful? I mean, it's an incredible subject. I think that's the reason someone wrote Ant-Man. I think people know more about ants now, actually, because of the Marvel movies. I'm going to put that out there. Okay. We now appreciate them more. They built a whole society, right? All right. So I always started this big ant unit. Then it was going to be about 8 weeks of us studying about ants with a story to get us into the picture, right?
And remember that at first grade level,
this was second grade.
Second grade is that, actually at kindergarten they started in first grade, second grade, right through there at the primary grades. Okay, one of the main standard goals is for kids to understand living things.
That's true.
But living things, quote, unquote, as a 2 words concept, living things, is actually very formal, and it's very symbolic, and it's very displaced. It's like learning about the alphabet or learning about transportation or learning about any of those words that you can't see, touch, feel, get hold of. So what Bonnie's doing now is she's taking the end goal here, and she's coming back down here to where we would start, which is what she says with what we already know, which means she has to bring it down to a point where the kids can put themselves into their own picture.
So I start with mine, which is a little displaced because it's not their lives. And I tell this story. I say, well, one morning I got up really, really early and I went into my kitchen. So let me just draw my little kitchen here and make a little faucet for the sink, and I'll draw the counter, and I'll draw the ground, and I'll hold on to this so it doesn't fall over a little bit, even though Vanna's doing a very good job holding on. And I decided to get up this early this morning and actually make some coffee for my husband. Now, he really likes coffee. I have to admit, I'm not a big coffee fan. Don't hate me for it. I'm much more of a tea girl myself. But I remember it was when my son was very young, and he was taking care of the baby. And so I'm like, okay, I'll get the coffee made. And so let's see if I can get my coffee pot going here. Okay, there's my little coffee pot, and there's the part where you put the coffee grounds in, and there's the pot. So the coffee would be in here. And it was really early in the morning. I remember that. It was really early. It was kind of dark. You know those dark kitchen mornings where you're like, got the light on, but it's still dark. And I noticed that near the coffee pot, there was kind of a black splotch on the kitchen counter. And I thought to myself, did someone spill some coffee grounds, right? Because I know coffee grounds look like kind of a black splotch when they come out and you're trying to clean out the filter. But then I looked a little closer and I realized, because first I was thinking, hey, what is that? Because it's dark, I'm tired, I'm still rubbing my eyes, right? And then I looked a little closer and I noticed that actually the splotch was kind of moving. There was movement, which, ew. So I looked a little closer and my question mark went away, and I actually realized that there were a bunch of really, really little tiny ants, which I know now as an older sugar ants. They're very, very tiny. I'm talking the tiniest kind, like, they're not going to bite you or anything, but oh my goodness, I must have spilled something on that counter because the ants were up there. And when I looked even closer, I noticed that they were coming in. They were like, there's a line of them all lined up and streaming. And it was a line there was one line of them going this way, and then there was another line of them going that way. And I don't know where they were going. Probably back to their queen, because I've learned that about ants through my studies with second graders, okay? So with this in mind, I saw ants in my kitchen, and then one of the students, when I told this story before, I said, well, what'd you do? And I said, oh, what did I do with them? That's a really good question. Well, I went over, I got a sponge from the sink, and I got the sponge wet, And I started to wipe them off, take them to the sink, turn on the water, rinse off the sponge. The ants went down, went back, wiped it up, got the ants. And then I kind of wiped down here because I know ants leave a scent trail so that they can follow like the other ants. And I wiped that up a bit. But ultimately, we did get some pretty non-toxic little ant traps that the sugar ants were able to. We were able to get them under control, basically. So then the question after this would be, okay, what's a time when you saw an ant? Why don't you write or draw about that?
Exactly. So a couple of things are happening here. One is that we've got a person, and we know that all languages, whether it's Chinese, ASL, whatever it happens to be, English, all languages start with the basic understanding of being the person who has a need, an intention, a belief, an idea. That person is known as an agent. And that agent does something, an action. In this case, she's looking at the counter. She's seeing the ants. Okay, the ants are kind of the object of what she's doing. Okay, so you have an agent with an action, or multiple actions here, with an object. And the objects, the ants themselves, they're actually doing things too. They have a trail going in, a trail going back out, that type of thing. And so she's looking to see what she can do then. So actually she has another thought bubble over here. And notice that these are actually thought bubbles. Okay, that's where your images or your concepts are that we've talked about. And so she's going to start refining those. And she said over the years of studying with the students, every time they do this event, she's learning something new. And as she learns something new, then she adds to her knowledge base of what it is that she knows about ants, okay? So this person here, this agent, doing an action with an object, those are called semantic relationships. Now remember, we said that the human brain changes with what we put in, and it changes off of what we know, like Bonnie said, and that means that we have to actually develop a multiple relationships, semantic relationships. So we have to have who we are, okay? So she turns it back to us as learners and says, okay, can you remember a time or think of a time when you, okay, saw, what was the question again?
A time that you saw an ant.
That you saw an ant, okay? And at that point, you've got all these kids with different ideas. And, you know, I'm out to the audience out there. You can imagine what they said. They said, well, gee, yeah, we went on a picnic and we saw an ant.
I saw them, or they say, I saw them in my kitchen too. I saw them crawling on the floor.
Yeah. My brother was putting them in a jar.
Yeah.
You know, those kinds of things. You get all kinds of stories. And what you want is you want those multiple stories. I know it may seem like we want to include everybody, but the only way to include everybody is to make sure everybody's included.
And so as the children put those on 3x5 cards in any way they want, draw, write, whatever, any way they want to express them, then we would gather as a group and they would first they would share their card stories, their when I saw an ant, with like one-on-one with a couple other kids, right? With maybe 2 or 3 other. Then we'd join as a class and each one would share their story. And I would have paper, like a chart pack paper, and I would tape each one of those stories on that paper. And for the entire unit, I'd say, oh, that reminds me of Johnny's story where he saw it here or there. So they're really part of that process, right?
Well, exactly. And if each of them is taped on the paper, and you have one paper with each kid's ideas on the paper, that means that you're also creating a social network. That's what social networks are all about.
And we learn from each other.
Absolutely.
We're part of the process.
Right.
Now, the next thing I would do after we talked, they saw my I story. This is called the I story, by the way. We can use them as much as we want. But what
it's her I story.
It's mine. It's pre-operational. It's my life. Notice that there's no one else in the picture. Although I referred to people because I was thinking about my husband and thinking about my son. So your story is an I story. And the next thing after we all shared I stories is I would actually pose this question to students. Well, what could we do to learn about ants?
Yeah, go to the library.
Like, what could we do as learners? Yeah. And so these are second graders.
We could go catch them.
We could catch them.
We could go on a walk and look for them.
So I would do the same thing.
We could have a picnic. I can think of all kinds of things we could do to learn about ants.
I would pose to them. I suppose we could just flip this over, but I don't mind. I got a little space here.
Yeah.
I would say to them, okay, so if we're learners in the classroom, this would be the start of it. We've got learners in the classroom, and we want to learn more about ants. How could we do that? and they would start giving me ideas, and I'd start putting them in the thinking bubbles of all the different ways. Could we read about them? Could we look at pictures about them? Could we watch YouTube videos about them?
Yes.
Could we actually go on a field trip to
Yes.
see an entomologist? Could we actually get an ant farm and have it in the classroom?
Yes.
Could we observe them?
Or bring somebody in that knows all
Yeah.
about ants?
Could we
and
bring a
show 'em?
special speaker in? So it was so interesting to let the kids tell me what they knew about seeking information. And some years I didn't get very many answers, which actually made me kind of sad. I'm sure you could tell them why. Like, why would that make you sad if you said, how could we learn more? And the kids say,
That means that they haven't been problem solving.
Yeah.
That means that they're not being given choices. You know, a baby, you hold up 2 outfits and you let them choose which one. They're both okay, but which one does the kid want? And you put out all those choices between 0 and 7, and when you do that, you start getting problems solved. Okay,
Oh, and I have to say,
because they have to have choice. But
Yeah.
if a kid doesn't have a way to problem solve, it means that they haven't been exposed to different choices, and therefore it's not an option to be able to solve the problem. See, it's all about opportunity. Okay, and if you don't have an opportunity, you don't have a need. You don't have a need, you don't have language function the way it's supposed to. Language doesn't function the way it's supposed to, then you can't get your thinking up to that higher level of thinking about living things, let
Right.
alone about how do I learn about an ant, you know.
well, and I have to add a caveat here, is some people might think, well, what was the population you were working with? Maybe they were ELL. Maybe maybe there was something impeding that. This happened to be at a school that would be considered high resource, high functioning, people with money. Everyone in that room spoke English as their first language. So this was a group of kids that
and it worked with them, but
Yeah.
you also, before
it does.
that,
But my point is, if people were saying, well, why didn't they have any ideas?
it-
It wasn't because they didn't have opportunity. Like, their
Well,
lives were very rich in many ways.
right.
It wasn't the typical, like,
But opportunity
yeah.
is more than having a rich life.
that's true too.
Because who owns the richness?
That's true.
Does it belong to the adults or does it belong to the kid?
And
Is the adult making the decisions?
the fact that this typically high performing, one would say, I'm doing that quote, air quotes, of high performing kids, could not answer. Some of them could not answer this question.
Yeah,
It
which
really
mean-
shocked me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
you know, if I take good care of you, okay, and do everything for you,
Yeah.
so that you don't have to make any decisions and you're not given any choices, that's no opportunity.
That's
And
right.
it doesn't matter what the economic background is.
That's true. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
because you can take kids that are in poverty that have better problem solving skills because the family says we've got a problem that we need to solve,
Yes,
and
yeah.
we don't know where we're going to sleep tonight, and we have a couple of choices. What would you prefer? When you want to be at Auntie's house or do you want to go to Uncle's house?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that gives the kids a chance to think about it. What do I need? What do I want? How do I notice I'm putting a lot of I's in there because that's where we start. And it doesn't matter how old we are, but we're always going to start, like you said, with what we know.
And a learner to say to them, how would you learn more about something?
Yeah.
And just, I would hope we'd get some ideas there. Like,
Well,
I can look
exactly.
at a book. I can do something with that.
Exactly.
And then after we kind of flowcharted or drew out different ways we could learn about ants, then we started to do them. And then what typically happens, if I can see if we can, it's kind of tight here, loosen that up a little bit for me. And then we should be able to just flip this board around a bit. I gotta loosen mine more. Sorry, I gotta do that, okay. All right, there we go. After that, we started to use the literacy processes in the classroom, which all had usually came up in our discussion. Okay. And that was to, what we going to do in the classroom? Some things we could do. We could read about ants, right? We could, let me get my little...
We could dress up in ant costumes.
We could do that too. But sometimes in the classroom, I was in public school. I was a little limited by some of the things. I was somewhat constrained.
But that's up
yeah.
to us as educators
that's
to help
true.
the kids understand.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and you give it back to them. You say,
Right.
"Oh, you think we could be in costumes?" Well, that means that we'd have to get those costumes. We'd have to go purchase them. I don't think everybody in here would have the money for it or the time for it. And our
exactly.
parents
And
probably couldn't do
sometimes they
it.
would suggest things, and I had to work through them.
Yeah, you have to work through
Yeah.
it because
Yeah.
all options, all choices are possible. until they're not possible. And then it becomes not an option. Okay, so it's not an option that we fly to Australia to see their cool ants. Okay?
I'd really like to go see the honeypot ants in Australia. Well,
yeah,
that'd be a really big field trip, folks, and I'm not sure how we'd arrange it, right? So, but in the classroom, we started to do different events like read, write, think, speak, view, right? Thankfully, nowadays, I was so grateful that YouTube became a thing eventually because we could actually see like leafcutter ants taking the leaves off and going into their colonies.
And they pack those leaves. It's so cool.
Oh my goodness. And then the extent of the colonies are huge. I saw a video once where they took the colony and they were a bit of a pest. They were stripping like crops and stuff. So forget it. It was a huge colony. And they actually put like aluminum and they poured it into the tunnels and then they excavated. And so you could see the extent of it. And it was so big. It was amazing. It was really cool. So I'm just going to put a little like projector here, like watching stuff in the classroom. So we could do all these things. We could write, think, view. And then we could even calculate because we started to think about how long do ants live? How big are their anthills? If you've got army ants, how wide is their, how wide do they fan out as they go through the jungles and eat everything? So we have all of these literacy processes that we started to do. Okay, don't.
I know it's hard to see.
Okay.
There you go.
Did I get them all? Read, write, think, speak, view, calculate. Oh, listen.
Yeah.
I'll put the listen
They
here.
share the stories.
As they share their stories, they also listen. And as we engage in these things and we layer them over and over in different ways and we say different aspects of ants, that's how we start to grow these concepts.
Right. And that's also the refinement. And so if you take a look at this, each one of these processes sets up opportunities in the classroom for the kids to actually grow their own brains through their use of their language. And it's very different than if Bonnie came in and she said, we're going to read a book about ants, and then I'm going to give you a sheet for you to fill out, and you can color it or write it. It's very, very different because the sheet that they have to fill out belongs to somebody else's thinking. The book is an author that belongs to somebody else. Okay, an author is outside of the kids in the classroom as learners. And we want the kids to view the movies. We want them to, see what other people do in other parts of the world for the ants. We want them to be able to hear what the other stories are in the classroom. We're going to start with the kid and what they know, and then continue to add. And it's kind of a scaffold, but we want them to continue to add multiple ways to understand their own thinking so that their language grows, and that's what grows the brains. On the other side, we can just pull this over for a second, very quickly.
Lefty Lucy.
There we go. If we just pull it over there, we also have the same thing. We have her telling her story, okay? And now if she quizzed them on her story or on an author's story, then who would own the language? Well, if you're an audience member and you said, well, she does, that's right. The kids don't. So being able to replicate, to imitate, to work and give responses based on her model of a story means that her brain grows and the kids' brains do not. Okay, so as they get older and older and older, they actually lose that opportunity to use their own brains to develop their own language and their own language to grow their own brains. And then over here, each of these thought bubbles that comes up here is actually more opportunity to not only hear it, but also to see it. So let's talk about seeing for just 1 second here, all right? She could have done the same kind of story and everything without drawing anything out. But then that meant that they already had the language for everything that you already knew. And that's way too high. Even at the college level, that's too high. If you bring in a new concept, maybe semantic relationships, you want to be able to see what that looks like. Well, semantic has to do meaning. Relationships has to do with how people, agents, connect with one another actions in order to act upon instruments or with instruments and objects in order to put that all together. And you do it in a story, who, what, where, when is in the morning, remember? Okay. And why? Well, she's making coffee for her husband, and at the same time, the why has to do with the ants, which is she saw this black thing, and why did she see it? Well, it turns out to be that they were ants, and they had this little trail. And what did she do about it? Well, she wiped it up. That's the how part. So automatically you have all the essence of a story, and guess what? You got to see it.
Mm-hmm.
And by seeing it, you actually have layers that have overlapped those patterns of what it is that I see, what it is that I hear, what it is that I know,
Mm-hmm.
okay? And that not only grows the brain, but it actually refines the thinking so that the connections are much more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
The more problem solving you do, the more the frontal lobe of the brain that you actually use to reconnect information that you've taken in through the senses. So it gives an opportunity for the brain to basically inhibit stuff that's not meaningful. Another way of saying that is that as these kids have more opportunities, all the thought bubbles, all the questions that you ask.
And see, can I just say that about the question part?
Yeah.
Because all of these happen in response to a question that I would pose. Like, what are the different types of ants? What is a species? Where do ants live? What do ants eat? How do they move? Where, all those were questions that I would put out there.
At different times.
Over
in a scaffold way.
Yeah, in a scaffold way in which they would use their thinking to research, view, discover, talk about. And then we would do that process together over and over.
And then they share it.
Always based off questions.
Right. Well, and they share
and a
it.
problem.
Right. And they share it with each other. So when they share it with each other, each child in the class provides another opportunity with what they share. You have 30 kids in the class, you've got 30 opportunities. You've got 5 kids in the class, and not so many.
Yeah.
So that's why, a lot of times educators get worried. They go, well, I can't meet all the kids' needs because I have too many kids. Yeah. That's not true, because actually what that does is allow you to have more opportunities, and that's what a complex society is about.
Right.
That's really what the social networks are that we're creating that are parallel to those brain networks that we have that are connecting the different parts and regions of the brain so that we can tell our stories. And then we have the language then to comprehend what we read. We have the language to understand what somebody says. We have the language to understand their viewpoint. That's the view part. And so when we come back over here and we take a look and we see all these thought bubbles up here, that's the thinking part, okay, that underlies semantic relationships is the beginning. The thinking are what it is that you actually see, the concepts drawn here. Those are your images. So we've talked a lot about where language begins here. Language is a representation of this thinking, of these concepts. But then down below it, in terms of straight imitation, if they don't belong to you and not part of your thinking, then they belong to somebody else. And those are just patterns.
Which don't grow the brain.
They don't grow the brain.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can talk more about that, though. Like, what is a pattern?
Absolutely.
Because we hear a lot like, the brain loves patterns. I've heard that.
Yes.
So maybe we could talk a little bit next time about...
Which it does.
Yeah,
the brain loves patterns.
But we got to do something with them, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to kick them upstairs, to be honest.
Kick them upstairs. I like that.
Okay. In other words, they need to go into the brain, into the neocortex.
Yeah.
Okay. So to kind of wrap it up here is that we wanted to make sure that you saw that you can actually represent what you're thinking with language and do the thinking part visually on, in this case, a dry erase board, and our poster paper or
whatever.
Chalkboard,
Post-it note, whatever you got.
Yeah,
you can use. And
exactly.
that this is not art. This is representation of thinking.
Right.
And if some of you might be thinking, "Wow, you did that really fast." Well, I've done it for a while. You got to do it, right?
Right.
Yeah. And then the kids get permission to do it, and it becomes a really, really beautiful feeling. I don't know how to tell you that.
And in terms of language grows brains, a couple other things here, and that is that we've got black on white. That's your best contrast in your brain in terms of visual processing. We have stick figures, which are edges and not shapes, which means that edges are actual patterns that the eyes see. The brain interprets it into a concept, and we're going to talk more about that. But we're doing here, we've got people grounded, we've got people thinking, okay? And what that means is that we're also representing the actual learning system and the way in which people actually learn. So we're probably going to talk a little bit more about that as we go. As we leave here, we would like you to think about this. And if you would like to see me draw that learning system out, then you can either go to my webpage, which is ellynlucasarwood.com, Or you can go to Chris Meredith's Neuroeducation Press, NEP, and I'm on his website too, and I'm drawing out the actual learning system. And if
and Ellyn does have
sorry.
her own YouTube channel, so you
Yeah.
can look that up as well. She's got lots of videos there. You
got
do.
some.
You got a few.
Yeah, anyway, so if you would like to see me draw out that learning system that we just referred to, then that would be a really good place to go and look at it. It's about a 30-minute in one place, 40-minute in another place. But it draws it out for adult learners like those of you that are listening to us today. All right. Thank you for joining us. We hope to see you next time. Bye.
Bye.